At my son's funeral, my daughter-in-law was on a trip with her lover. That night, I got a message from my son's number. I'm alive. Come to the cemetery right now. I drove there, and what I saw froze me. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge. I want to know how far it has reached. I stood in the middle of the church. The scent of white lilies was so strong it made me dizzy. The priest's voice resonated monotonously, a constant buzz grazing my ears, but no word could settle in my mind. My thoughts drifted, dragged toward the past days, toward the moments when I could still hear the laugh of Andrew, my son, in front of me. His portrait rested on a wooden easel. His smile was as radiant as ever, but the eyes in the photo seemed to look at me with infinite sadness. Mrs. Carter, my lifelong neighbor, squeezed my arm gently. Her voice, barely a whisper, brushed the air. I can't believe Sarah hasn't come on a day like this. I heard her, but I didn't have the strength to answer. I only nodded with a mechanical movement so she would know I was still there, that I was still breathing even though my heart had been shattered. The funeral ended and people approached one by one, saying the same old phrases. Take good care of yourself, Mrs. Harrison. Andrew was a good person, what a shame. Their words passed through my ears like water over a stone, leaving no trace. As night fell, my small house was submerged in silence. The cold of the walls seeped into my bones. I sat on the old armchair in the living room, across from the chair where Andrew used to read. He liked to sit there, turning the pages of his engineering books, and sometimes looking up to smile at me. Mom, did you know how many tons of steel this structure needs? Now that chair was empty, like the void left in my soul, impossible to fill. I tried to prepare a cup of chamomile tea, hoping the soft aroma would calm me, but my hands were shaking. The boiling water spilled onto the table and the heat made me jump. I quickly wiped it, trying to concentrate, but my mind was a whirlwind. At that moment, the old phone on the table vibrated with a dry sound in the middle of the silent house. That noise was like thunder. I shuddered, my heart pounding hard. Who could be texting me at this hour? I picked up the phone. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped it. The screen lit up, and seeing the sender's name made my blood run cold. Andrew was my son's old number, the same one that had been deactivated right after his death. I opened the message, my eyes blurred by tears. There was only one line. Mom, I'm not dead. Come to the cemetery right now. I read and reread those words, each one engraving itself on my chest. It couldn't be. Andrew was dead. I saw him with my own eyes at the morgue, his face tranquil but cold. So where was this message coming from? Who would dare to play with my pain like this? I stood up suddenly, without thinking. Outside, the rain was starting to fall, thick drops hitting the windows as if they wanted to bring the world down. I grabbed the wool coat hanging on the rack and the car keys. I didn't know what I was doing. I only knew that I had to go to the cemetery immediately, as if an invisible force were pushing me. I drove in the rain, the headlights cutting through the curtain of water. The streets of Phoenix, Arizona were deserted at midnight. Only the sound of the tires on the wet asphalt accompanied me. I couldn't think of anything but that message. Mom, I'm not dead, but how is it possible? But if there was a minimal hope, however small, that Andrew was still alive, I had to cling to it. I stopped the car in front of the city cemetery entrance. The heavy iron gate was ajar, just enough for a person to slip through, as if someone had done it on purpose, waiting for me. I got out of the car. The rain was hitting my face, icy, but I didn't feel anything. I pushed the gate, and the humid air and the smell of fresh earth mixed with the cold of the night. The flickering yellow lights projected shadows onto the crooked gravestones, creating a gloomy and terrifying scene. I followed the gravel path that led to the new section of the cemetery where Andrew rested. My steps on the wet leaves produced a faint crunch, as if someone were whispering in the darkness. My heart pounded fiercely, caught between hope and fear. I didn't know what I expected to find, a miracle, a dreadful truth, or just a cruel joke. In the distance, I saw Andrew's grave. The earth was still recent, with no trace of grass. The bouquets of flowers that people had left that morning were already wilting in the rain, and the white petals were falling to the ground. I slowed my pace, and every movement felt like an immense burden. And then my heart stopped. Someone was standing there, right in front of my son's gravestone. I am Mrs. Clara Harrison. I'm 65 years old, a single mother who dedicated her entire life to raising her son to become a good and talented man. When my husband died of a stroke, Andrew was barely a college student. I still remember the endless nights under the dim kitchen light, reviewing every dollar I earned at my part-time job in a sewing workshop just to ensure Andrew could pay his tuition. But watching him grow up and become a successful engineer made all the sacrifice worthwhile. Andrew was the light of my life, the reason I got up every morning, even when I was exhausted. The day Andrew introduced me to Sarah Miller, I felt my heart blossom. Sarah was beautiful, with shiny black hair and a radiant smile. She worked in marketing, was eloquent, and knew how to make others feel comfortable. I remember that afternoon in my living room with a cup of coffee in hand, enthusiastically telling me about the projects she was working on. "Mrs. Harrison, I admire you so much," she said, her eyes bright. "Andrew told me you raised him alone. I hope one day I can be as strong as you." Her words moved me. I felt I had not only a son, but also a daughter. After their wedding, I decided to move to a small house on the outskirts of Phoenix. It wasn't big. It had only 2 bedrooms and a small garden, but for me, it was full of memories. I didn't want to be a meddling mother-in-law, someone who interfered in the newlyweds' lives. "I want you to have your own space," I told Andrew when he objected. He hugged me and whispered, "Mom, I just want you close." But I knew I had to let him build his own home. The first months after the wedding seemed perfect. Sarah used to call me, always cheerful, "Mom, come for dinner this weekend. I'm going to prepare chili, the one you like so much." I would smile and nod into the phone, feeling our family had grown a little more. Andrew would send me photos of their trips on the Miami beach or in front of the brick walls covered with ivy in Charleston. In the images, Andrew was always smiling, hugging Sarah, and I thought my son had finally found true happiness. But then the cracks began to appear, so small that at first I didn't pay them much attention. Sunday lunches, when I used to cook a table full of traditional dishes for the whole family to gather, became less frequent. Andrew started coming alone with the excuse, "Sarah is busy. She has to meet with partners downtown. Mom, she's very busy with the year-end project." I nodded, trying not to think too much. Sarah worked in marketing, a demanding field, and I didn't want to judge her, but the way Andrew forced a smile when talking about his wife made me feel a slight ache in my chest. Something wasn't right, but I kept telling myself that maybe it was just normal problems between young spouses. Then Andrew's calls late at night became more frequent. He would call late when I was already in bed, his voice hoarse with fatigue. "Mom, Sarah won't be home tonight," he would say, trying to sound calm. "She said she's staying at a hotel because she has an early meeting tomorrow." I heard the weight in his words, as if he were trying to hide some pain. "Maybe she's just busy, son," I replied, even though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. "Talk to your wife, everything will work out," but I knew nothing was right. One afternoon, I decided to take a pot of chicken noodle soup to their house without announcing it. I just wanted to do something for Andrew to make him feel his mother was still there, worried. When I arrived, the front door wasn't locked. I went in, calling softly, "Andrew, Sarah?" No one answered. I left the soup on the kitchen table, and then I heard whispers from the balcony. It was Sarah. She was talking on the phone in a low voice, full of tenderness, different from the one she used with her coworkers. "No, love, I'll try to sort it out this weekend." She stopped, turned her head, and when she saw me, her face tensed. She immediately hung up and forced a smile. "Mom, when did you get here? I was talking to a client." I nodded, pretending not to notice anything, but my heart felt heavy. Something didn't add up, and I knew Sarah was hiding something. One night, Andrew called me, desperate. "Mom, we argued again," he said, his voice trembling. "Sarah bought a designer bag so expensive I can't believe it. But she tells me the company is doing badly and we have to save." I heard the anguish in his voice, not just about the money, but about something deeper. "That's how women are, son." I tried to comfort him, though I didn't know what to say myself. Maybe she just wanted to treat herself. "Calm down, talk calmly, don't let this get out of hand." Andrew was silent for a moment and then replied softly, "I'll do my best, Mom." But the moment I truly understood that everything had changed was on my 65th birthday. Andrew had reserved a table at an elegant restaurant with bright chandeliers and impeccable white tablecloths. He said Sarah would arrive later. She was in a meeting. We sat talking about trivial things, the tomatoes I grew in my garden, his new construction project. But every time I looked into his eyes, I saw a deep sadness he was trying to hide. We waited for Sarah for an hour. Finally, Andrew's phone vibrated. A message from Sarah. Sorry, the boss called an emergency meeting. Happy birthday to your mom. Andrew read the message, his hand trembling as he held his wine glass. He forced a smile and said, Let's eat, Mom. Sarah will come later. But I knew she wouldn't come. That dinner was just the two of us. We ate in silence, exchanging empty phrases occasionally. I looked at Andrew. He was thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, and his smile no longer had its former brightness. On Tuesday afternoon, I entered the Sunny Corner Cafe with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. This place was special to me and Andrew. Ivy covered the entire interior patio wall, its red flowers fallen onto the brick floor like a natural carpet. Every time we came, we used to stay for hours, talking about everything from how the tomatoes grew in my garden to the architectural projects Andrew was designing. I arrived early and chose our usual wooden table in the corner where the afternoon light filtered through the flower-laden branches, forming golden gleams. I ordered a lemonade, that sweet drink I've always liked. I sat there, turning the glass in my hands, waiting for Andrew. He arrived 15 minutes late, which was very unusual for him. When I saw him enter, I barely recognized him. He was thinner. The light blue shirt that used to fit him perfectly now looked big on his shoulders. He had noticeable dark circles and an unshaved beard, as if he no longer had the energy to take care of himself. He sat across from me and gave me a forced smile. Sorry, Mom. The traffic was terrible, he said, but his voice sounded dull. We started talking about trivial things, as we always did. I told him that the garden tomato already had some small, bright red fruits. I plan to use them to make the salad you like so much, I said, hoping to see a bit of light in his eyes. He nodded and replied, Sounds good, Mom. The bridge project got complicated this week. The contractor delivered the wrong materials and everything is delayed. But his tone was monotonous, as if he was only speaking to fill the silence. The conversation broke off naturally at times. I felt an invisible distance between us, and it hurt. The waitress, a young woman with a kind smile, approached. I ordered a serving of donuts to share, but Andrew shook his head. Just a black coffee, no sugar for me, he said. I was so surprised that I almost let out an exclamation. Andrew could never stand bitter coffee. He always added milk or sugar. He used to say that black coffee embittered even the soul. But that afternoon, he only stirred it distractedly, clinking the spoon against the cup with an irritating sound. Suddenly, Andrew stopped, put the spoon aside, and looked me straight in the eyes. His gaze was firm, determined. But there was also a fear in it that I'd never seen before. Mom, I have to tell you something important, he said in a low, serious voice. I felt my heart quicken, as if I knew what he was about to say would change everything. He took a small white card with black letters from his pocket and slid it across the table to me. It was from a law firm in downtown Phoenix. I want to make my will, he said. I froze, almost spilling the lemonade. Will? I murmured, my voice breaking. But you're only 35, Andrew. Why are you talking like this? I felt my chest tighten. Just the thought of my son, so young and full of life, talking about wills made me feel the world crumbling. He shook his head gently, not looking away. I want everything I have. The house, the savings, the car, to go to you, he said firmly, like someone who had made an irreversible decision. I took his hand. It was icy, even though the afternoon was still warm. What about Sarah? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She's your wife, Andrew. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the ivy in the patio, its red flowers swaying in the wind. When he spoke, his voice became grave, as if every word weighed heavily on him. I'm not sure she still loves me, Mom. Last week, I found a hotel reservation receipt in Scottsdale for 2 people, but Sarah told me she had gone to a meeting with a client. Andrew's words were like a stab in the heart. I remembered the time Sarah had been absent, Andrew's late-night calls, and that moment when I saw her whispering on the balcony. I had tried to ignore those signs, convincing myself they were misunderstandings, that Sarah was just busy with work. But now, looking into Andrew's eyes, I knew he no longer believed those extent. I suspect she's cheating on me, he continued, taking a deep breath as if to muster courage. But I don't have irrefutable proof. I squeezed his hand, searching for words to comfort him, but my throat was tight. Son, what if it's all a misunderstanding? I said, though I didn't believe it myself. Isn't talking about a will too soon? Andrew shook his head, his gaze firm. It's not soon, Mom. I have a very strange feeling. I've already asked for help from an old friend. He's someone I trust completely. Who is this friend? I asked, but Andrew only made a dismissive gesture and gave a weak smile. He lives abroad, but he'll be back soon. When everything is over, I'll tell you everything. I just want to make sure you're safe, no matter what happens. His words made me shudder. Safe? Why was he so worried about me? I wanted to ask him more, but his look pleaded with me not to insist. I stayed silent, nodding, though a deep anxiety invaded me inside. Our conversation dissolved into silence. The sound of the spoon against the cup had stopped, but the air between us weighed more than ever. When we got up to leave, Andrew hugged me tightly, more than usual. He buried his face in my hair and whispered, "Take good care of yourself, Mom." His voice trembled, as if he were holding back something he couldn't say. I hugged him, feeling my son's warmth, but also an invisible distance that I couldn't break. I stayed there, watching Andrew drive away in his silver sedan until he turned the corner. The sunset light fell on the street, making the car shine like a farewell. I didn't know that would be the last time I would see my son alive. A week after that meeting, I was in the garden watering the vegetables. The morning sun streamed through the tree branches, making the water droplets on the leaves shine like small pearls. I loved mornings like that, when everything seemed calm, with just the birds singing and the murmur of the sprinkler water. But that day, the tranquility was broken by the telephone ringing inside the house, a sharp, persistent sound as if demanding immediate attention. I wiped my hands on my apron, still stained with dirt, and went inside. I picked up the receiver, breathing heavily from walking fast. "Hello, who is this?" On the other end, I heard the voice of an unknown man, grave and contained, as if he were struggling to remain calm before saying something painful. "Could I speak with Mrs. Clara Harrison?" I replied, "Yes, this is me." But my heart was already pounding hard, dreading the worst. "Ma'am, this is Officer Davis from the Phoenix Police Department," he said. Just hearing him, I had to lean on the table not to fall. "What's wrong, officer?" I asked, my voice trembling, trying in vain to maintain composure. The officer's voice resonated, slowly but heavily. "We regret to inform you there was an accident on the highway toward Flagstaff, a silver sedan, license plate." He read the number, and I felt my blood run cold. It was Andrew's car, her son, Mr. Andrew Harrison. He didn't survive. The phrase, "he didn't survive," was like a hammer blow to my head. The phone slipped from my hands and fell onto the tiled floor with a dry thud. The world around me sank into silence. I only heard the blood roaring in my ears, a dull buzzing like the sea. I don't know when I collapsed to the floor. My knees hit the tile, but I didn't feel pain. My mind was empty, and I only saw Andrew, his smile, his warm gaze, his strong hug at that cafe. I picked up the phone with trembling hands and almost shouted into the receiver, "Accident! Why? How could it happen?" My voice sounded foreign, broken. "My son told me last week he would take the car to the mechanic on Monday. He was very careful. It couldn't have been an accident." On the other end, there was silence for a few seconds, and then Officer Davis replied with a compassionate tone that I knew was feigned. "Ma'am, we understand your shock. The preliminary report indicates that the vehicle's brakes failed. The car lost control and crashed into the barrier." "Damaged brakes?" I shook my head again and again, as if I could see him through the phone. "Impossible!" I almost screamed. "Andrew was very careful. He would never let his car have a problem like that." But he only repeated, "For now, we have no evidence of a criminal act. We will continue investigating." Upon hanging up, I stayed there on the cold floor, hugging my knees. I didn't cry, not because I was strong, but because the pain was so great it paralyzed me. Andrew, my only son, the being to whom I dedicated my entire life, was gone. I couldn't believe it. Just a week before, he had been in front of me talking about his will, his concerns about Sarah, and now he was gone. The first thing I did when I managed to calm down a bit was call Sarah. I dialed her number with hands trembling so much I had to try several times. The phone rang, but went straight to voicemail. Her voice, cheerful and carefree, came on. "Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm busy. Leave your message." I called again, and this time I left a message with a choked voice. "Sarah, call me. Something happened. Andrew is gone." I sent her several more messages. Where are you, Sarah? Call me. Andrew was hurt. But they all remained sent, never read. I kept staring at the screen, feeling the whole world turning its back on me. The following days passed like a nightmare. I had to take care of everything alone. I went to the coroner's office to identify Andrew. When I saw him there, his face serene but lifeless, I had to bite my lips not to scream. I chose a simple wooden coffin just like he was, unostentatious, just clean and warm. I contacted the church, set the date for the service step by step like a machine without emotions, because if I allowed myself to feel, I would completely collapse. The night before the funeral, I sat in the living room, hugging the framed photo of Andrew as a child. In the picture, he was in the garden, holding a bright red tomato and smiling from ear to ear. "Mom, this one is the biggest of all," he shouted, as if it were the greatest achievement of his life. I stroked the frame, and finally, the tears began to fall. "Son, why did you leave me alone?" I whispered, but only silence answered me. At the funeral, I stood there, still as a shadow. People came to offer condolences, familiar faces from the neighborhood, Andrew's co-workers, old friends. They hugged me, said words of comfort, but I didn't hear anything. My mind was trapped somewhere between the pain and the unanswered questions. Sarah wasn't there. Not a call, not a message. I tried not to think about her, to concentrate on saying goodbye to Andrew, but her absence was another wound that kept opening inside me. Among the crowd, Mrs. Carter, my neighbor since my husband died, pulled me aside. Her face reflected worry, and her hands trembled as she put her phone in mine. "Clara, I'm sorry, but my daughter just saw this on social media." I looked at the screen and my heart stopped. It was a photo of Sarah standing on South Beach, Miami, in a bright red bikini, smiling as if nothing had happened. She was holding a man with dark hair by the arm. Both were raising their cocktail glasses, their eyes full of happiness. The text below read, "Paradise is real." The photo had been posted only a few hours earlier, on the same day as Andrew's funeral. In that instant, everything inside me shattered. I remembered Andrew's tired face at the cafe, his voice repeating, "I'm not sure she still loves me." His words about the will, his insecurities, his suspicions of infidelity, and now that photo, everything fit together like pieces of a terrible puzzle. Damaged brakes? With how careful Andrew was, I knew better than anyone. And Sarah, who should be here, was laughing on a distant edge with another man. The pain inside me transformed into something else. Cold, firm, and sharp as a knife blade. Now the rain hits my face, icy, but I feel nothing. The world seems reduced to me, Andrew's grave, and the man standing motionless in front of the headstone like a statue. A strong wind blows, the dry branches creak, as if the cemetery itself were murmuring of something. The man shuddered, turned slightly, and that small movement broke the oppressive silence, pushing me to move forward. I walked slowly, my heels sinking into the wet earth, the crunch of the gravel echoing in the middle of the stillness. When I was a few steps away, I saw him better. He was wearing an old leather jacket, his gray hair soaked and plastered to his forehead under the dim light. His face showed a life marked by pain. The wrinkles around his eyes told his story, but his firm, clear eyes had something familiar. I had seen that face in old photos Andrew showed me once, the happy university days, when he and his friends laughed together. My heart began to pound hard, almost escaping my chest. "Mrs. Harrison." His voice was deep and husky, but firm, tearing through the darkness. I froze, stammering, "Who are you? Where is my son?" The question came out by instinct, even though I knew Andrew couldn't be there. But that message, those words, "I'm not dead," had planted a spark of crazy hope inside me, even if only for an instant. The man took a step toward me, not looking away. "I'm Julian Rogers," he said, and immediately memories flooded me like a wave. Julian, Andrew's best friend since high school, the one who had moved with his family to London 20 years ago. Andrew used to speak of him proudly, calling him the brother he trusted the most. "Julian, the friend Andrew told me about?" I whispered, incredulously. He nodded, his face full of guilt, as if carrying an enormous weight. "I was the one who sent that message," he said in a Kevib voice. I used a special device that can simulate Andrew's old number. I'm sorry for impersonating him, Mrs. Harrison. I know it was cruel, but if I had called with my name, perhaps you wouldn't have believed me or come here at midnight." He paused for a moment, looking down as if struggling with himself. I had no other choice. Anger exploded inside me, mixed with confusion. "Why?" I almost shouted, tears falling and mixing with the rain. "Why did you do something so cruel? Do you know how much I suffered? Do you know what it was like to feel, even for a second, that my son was still alive?" My voice broke. I took a step toward him, just wanting to grab him, wanting to demand an answer for the pain that was tearing me apart. Julian didn't avoid my gaze. He held my eyes, which were filled with deep sadness. "Because Andrew asked me to," he said, his voice choked, as if every word cost him. "A month ago, Andrew called me. He said he felt uneasy, that something wasn't right in his life. He left me a message with clear instructions. If you don't hear from me in a week, save my mother." His words were like a dagger in the heart. My knees buckled, and if Julian hadn't stepped forward to hold my arm, I would have fallen to the cold ground. I clung to his arm, tears mixing with the rain. "Save me from what?" I sobbed, trembling. "What did Andrew tell you? Why was he so worried about me?" Julian helped me sit on a nearby bench under a large tree where the rain fell softer. He sat next to me and his voice became firm, charged with the determination of someone who killed Mrs. Harrison. "Your son did not die in an accident. Come to my house," I said, still with a trembling voice. "We can't talk here." The cemetery, with the wind moaning among the gravestones and the rain whipping our faces, was no place to continue that conversation. Julian nodded with a mixture of resolution and remorse in his gaze. I led him toward the car. We walked in silence, the sound of the stones under our feet and the constant rain accompanying us throughout the journey. Neither of us spoke. Only the thump of the windshield wipers and the drumming of the rain against the glass filled the silence. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to control the shaking of my hands. In my mind, the image of Andrew returned again and again, his smile, his hoarse voice at the cafe, and that final warning, "Take care, Mom." Now that Julian said Andrew hadn't had an accident, that someone had wanted to take his life, I felt the world crumbling once more. But at the same time, a steady flame began to ignite inside me. I needed the truth, even if it hurt to the soul. Upon arriving home, I invited Julian into the kitchen, my small kitchen, with its old wooden table and the potted plants on the windowsill. Suddenly, it seemed strange to me, as if belonged to another life. I put water on to heat. My hands still trembled, although a little less. I needed to do something, even if it was just preparing a cup of chamomile tea to keep from breaking down. Julian sat at the table, took off his soaked leather jacket and hung it on the back of the chair. He placed a tablet on the table, the screen black, as if waiting to reveal the secrets Andrew had left behind. "I was a police inspector in London," Julian began with a grave, clear voice, that of someone accustomed to facing harsh truths. "I retired early for health reasons, but Andrew and I grew up together in this neighborhood before my family moved. We never lost touch." He paused, his gaze lost, remembering old times. "Andrew was my best friend. He was always a dependable man who put his family above everything. That's why when he called me a few months ago, I knew something serious was happening." He turned on the tablet, and after a few taps, he opened a protected file. "This is what Andrew sent me," he said in a low voice. The screen lit up, and I leaned in to look. First, an extract of Andrew and Sarah's joint bank account appeared. The cold, ruthless numbers unfolded before my eyes. I saw large, regular cash withdrawals every weekend at ATMs near a resort and casino outside the city. "Andrew never gambled," I whispered, my voice trembling. I remembered well that my son was careful with money. He always said that every dollar saved was for building the future. He would never do that. Julian nodded and kept sliding the screen. A screenshot of Andrew's personal laptop appeared with a message in red. "Account has been locked due to too many failed login attempts." I frowned, not understanding. Julian explained. "Andrew said only Sarah knew he kept important documents on his computer. She tried to get in to take something out, but didn't succeed." I felt a shiver run down my spine. Sarah, the daughter-in-law I had loved so much, whom I considered a daughter, now she appeared to me as a stranger. Then Julian opened a messaging app. On the screen appeared captures of conversations Andrew had taken from Sarah's phone while she was sleeping. The recipient was named Thomas Reed. I read every line, every word, cutting into my soul. Honey, this weekend? Yes, that's the usual spot, Thomas wrote. Sarah replied, Of course, my love. I'll tell the old man I have a business trip. Another message from Thomas. When can we be together openly? I'm tired of hiding. And Sarah's response, cold and cruel. Very soon, love. The plan is going well. I stayed motionless, tears falling onto the old wooden table. Those words destroyed the image I had tried to maintain, believing Sarah was only busy, confused, or that it was all a misunderstanding. Thomas Reed is a real estate agent, Julian said in a grave voice. He's in financial trouble. Sarah and he have been seeing each other for over a year. I covered my face, trying to hold back the sobs, but it was useless. Andrew, my son, had lived in that lie, enduring a pain I never managed to see. Julian continued, his voice filled with sadness. Andrew knew he couldn't face them alone. He had planned to gather enough evidence to divorce Sarah, protect his assets, and, most importantly, bring you to London to live with me and my family. He feared Sarah might harm you if everything came to light. He slid his finger across the screen and opened a confirmation email. It was 2 one-way plane tickets from Phoenix to London in my name and Andrew's. The flight date was the following Tuesday. I didn't manage to get back to help him with the paperwork when it all happened, Julian finished, his voice breaking, as if he blamed himself. I looked up and wiped my tears, but they continued to fall uncontrollably. The pain of losing Andrew still tore at my heart, but beneath that pain, a new flame began to ignite, a cold, sharp flame of rage and determination. I looked at Julian with a voice firmer than before. What do we do now? I asked, with a certainty that sounded as if the pain had forged me into someone different, stronger, more determined. Julian looked at me with a serious but cautious expression. What we have is only indirect evidence, he said, gently tapping the wooden table with his fingers. They prove Sarah was unfaithful and that she had a motive. But to prove she took Andrew's life, we need irrefutable evidence. The word took his life fell like a knife cut, but I didn't flinch. I was ready to face the truth, no matter how cruel. So, what should we do? I asked, my icy hands clasped together. I felt my nails digging into my palms, but that pain was nothing compared to the fire burning inside me. Julian leaned forward, his voice grave. I know someone, he said, a private investigator. His name is Mr. Vargas. He's very good and discreet. If anyone can find the evidence we need, it's him. The next morning, we drove to a small restaurant on the outskirts of Phoenix where no one would recognize us. The place was hidden down a dirt road with a few wooden tables and the intense aroma of toasted coffee. I chose a secluded corner where the sunlight didn't reach, as if I wanted to hide from the world. Mr. Vargas arrived punctually, a middle-aged man with such an ordinary appearance that he was easy to forget. But his eyes were sharp as blades, capable of peering any secret. He wore a worn fabric jacket, carried a notebook in his hand, and sat across from us without unnecessary words. Julian and I told him everything, Andrew's suspicions, Sarah's messages, the photo of her on Miami Beach on the day of the funeral. Mr. Vargas listened without interrupting. He only wrote occasionally in his notebook, with quick, precise strokes. When Julian showed him the bank statements and the captures from Andrew's laptop, Mr. Vargas nodded silently. Finally, when we finished, he leaned back in his chair and observed us with a calculating look. It will be difficult, he said in a serene but sure voice. She's very careful, but no one is perfect. Julian placed a thick envelope on the table and pushed it toward Mr. Vargas. It's an advance, he said. We need results as soon as possible. Mr. Vargas looked at the envelope. He didn't touch it immediately. He just nodded. I'll start immediately, as he replied, and stood up and left as quickly as he'd arrived. I watched him walk away with the feeling of having placed my last hope in the hands of a stranger. The following days passed with a tension that cut my breath. I hardly slept. Every noise outside, the rustling of leaves, the distant barking of a dog, made me jump, thinking Sarah had returned, or worse, that she already knew I suspected her. I checked my phone constantly, but Sarah remained missing. Not a call, not a message. Maybe she was waiting for everything to calm down, like a patient hunter. I tried to stay busy, watering the plants, cleaning the house, but my mind always returned to Andrew, to what Julian had said. Your son did not have an accident. Exactly 1 week after the funeral, Julian's phone rang. I was sitting in the living room hugging Andrew's portrait when he looked at the screen in surprise. It's Mr. Vargas, he said in a low voice, but full of hope. He answered, nodded several times, and then said briefly, We'll be right there. Upon hanging up, he looked at me, his eyes shining. He has what we needed. We met with Mr. Vargas at the same restaurant as always. This time, he placed a USB flash drive and a pile of photos on the table. The first one showed Sarah and Thomas Reed entering a luxury Miami hotel together, holding hands, laughing, happy. The next one made my heart sink. They were kissing passionately by the pool, the sunlight illuminating Sarah's radiant face. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my skin. She was there when I didn't finish the sentence, but Mr. Vargas nodded, understanding my pain. This is the important thing, Mr. Vargas said, pointing to the USB flash drive. I installed a tiny microphone under the seat of Reed's rented car in Miami. They talked on their way to the airport to return. He connected the USB to his computer, put on his headphones, found a fragment, and activated the speaker. I held my breath, preparing for what I was about to hear. Thomas's voice came first, trembling, full of worry. Are you sure everything is fine? No one suspects anything. Then Sarah's voice was heard, complicit and chilling. What are you worried about? A tragic accident. Just a small cut in the brake line, and that's it. Andrew dies, and we get everything. The house, the savings, and the huge life insurance policy he just bought. I felt my heart clench. Every word from Sarah was like a stab, tearing apart the little that remained of my soul. Thomas spoke again, still nervous. And the old lady, will she inherit? Sarah let out a dry, blood-curdling laugh. Don't worry. As soon as I collect the insurance, I'll take care of her. A short circuit, a fall in the bathtub. Easy, I'll make her go with her beloved son very soon. Mr. Vargas stopped the recording. The room fell silent. Only our heavy breaths were audible. I squeezed my hand so hard that my nails left red, painful marks. But that physical pain was nothing compared to the rage and anguish devouring me inside. Sarah, whom I once considered my daughter, had not only betrayed Andrew, but also planned to kill me. I looked at Julian, and he returned my gaze. Our eyes met, and without a word, we both understood. The time had come to seek justice for Andrew. Without hesitation, Julian and I took all the evidence, the photos of Sarah and Thomas in Miami, the bank statements, and the incriminating recording, to the Phoenix police station, where Officer Davis received us, the same one who had called me to inform me of Andrew's accident. This time, his attitude was completely different. The false compassion I remembered was gone. In its place, he showed absolute seriousness and concentration. He sat across from us in a small room, and the fluorescent tube light gave him an even more severe look. When Julian handed him the USB flash drive with the recording, I noticed his hand trembled slightly as he connected it to the computer. The recording began to play. Sarah's voice sounded cold, calculating, while Thomas's suggested nervousness. You just have to touch the brake line a little, and that's it, Sarah said, as if talking about a simple vacation plan. When I collect the insurance money, I'll take good care of the old lady. Every word was like a stab, not just because of its cruelty, but because it confirmed what I feared most. Andrew, my son, had been murdered, and I was next on the list. Officer Davis listened to everything, his face growing paler. My God, he muttered, his voice hoarse. He quickly typed something on his computer, took notes, and then looked at us. We will request an arrest warrant immediately, but he warned us that the legal process would take time. The warrant had to be approved by a judge, and in the meantime, we had to remain silent and act as if we knew nothing. Sarah and Thomas must not suspect you've discovered them, Officer Davis said with a penetrating gaze. If they feel cornered, they can become dangerous. I nodded, although anxiety invaded me inside. The idea of continuing to live as if everything were normal, knowing that Sarah planned to take care of me, made me feel like I was walking on a tightrope on the edge of the abyss. 2 days later, Sarah returned. I was in the kitchen washing dishes when I heard a car engine stop in front of the house. I looked out the window and saw her getting out of a black SUV, dressed completely in black, her face almost hidden behind huge sunglasses. She was trying to feign sadness, but I knew it was pure theater. My heart pounded hard, not out of fear, but out of the consuming anger. She rang the doorbell once, then again, but I didn't open the door. Officer Davis had warned me not to confront her alone or let her suspect anything. The doorbell rang a third time, and then I heard my phone vibrate. It was Sarah. I looked at the screen. Her name flashed, but I didn't answer. A message came in immediately. "Mom, I'm here. Can you open the door? I need to talk to you." I gripped the phone tightly, my nails digging into my palm. No, I wasn't going to let that woman cross my threshold. That night, Julian insisted on staying. He sat on the living room sofa with a cup of black coffee in his hand, his eyes always alert. "I can't leave you alone," he said firmly. "I have a bad feeling." I tried to convince him I was fine, but his gaze wouldn't allow discussion. "Andrew asked me to protect you," he said, lowering his tone. "I won't fail him again." I nodded, feeling a mix of security and uneasiness. I went up to my room, but I couldn't sleep. Every noise, the wind at the window, the branches scraping the roof, made me jump, imagining Sarah was out there lurking. Around 2 a.m., a strange noise echoed from the backyard. It wasn't the wind or moving leaves, but a metallic sound as if someone were tampering with something. I got up carefully, drew the curtain, and looked down. Under the dim moonlight, I saw a silhouette bending down next to the house's main electrical box. My heart skipped a beat when I recognized Sarah. She was wearing a hooded jacket, but her figure and the way she moved were unmistakable. She was doing something with the electrical box, holding small pliers, moving stealthily like a thief. I ran to the living room and shook Julian awake. "She's outside," I whispered, my voice trembling. "She's doing something with the electrical box." Julian got up immediately, his eyes cold and determined. He didn't turn on the lights. He just took his phone and called Officer Davis. "She's here," he murmured urgently, "at number 14 Oak Street. She's tampering with the electrical box. Send a patrol immediately." He motioned for me to be silent and to stay away from the switches. "She's setting a trap," he said in a low voice, full of caution. "She could cause a short circuit if you turn on the lights in the morning. A spark could start a fire. Everything would look like an accident." We stayed in the darkness, holding our breath, listening to the metallic sound outside. It stopped, but I could still feel Sarah's presence, like a ghost on the prowl. My heart pounded hard, not out of fear, but out of the anger that consumed me. She had already taken Andrew from me, and now she wanted to take my life just to keep the insurance money and live freely with Thomas. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my skin, but I didn't care. I just wanted them to catch her. I wanted justice for my son. A few minutes later, I heard the soft sound of an engine stopping at the end of the street. There were no sirens, just a tense mince. Flashlight beams illuminated the garden, and then a blood-curdling scream from Sarah broke the night. Julian and I ran to the window and saw the police burst in. Sarah was frozen under the light, a roll of wire and pliers in her hand. Her tools were scattered on the ground, irrefutable evidence. She tried to scream desperately, but, "What are you doing? I was just checking the electrical box." But the commanding officer, a woman with a severe gaze, shook her head. "Mrs. Sarah Miller, you're under arrest for suspicion of vandalism and attempted harm." At that moment, Officer Davis called Julian to inform him that Thomas Reed had been arrested at the Phoenix airport. He was about to board a one-way flight to Cancun with a suitcase full of cash, Andrew's life insurance money, which Sarah had quickly withdrawn. "He already confessed everything," Officer Davis said over the phone with obvious satisfaction. "He admitted to helping Sarah sabotage the brakes on Andrew's car, but he claims it was her idea. We have enough evidence to bring both of them to trial." When Julianne hung up, I sank onto the sofa, tears streaming down my face. But this time, not only out of pain, it was relief mixed with an immense void. Justice had been done for Andrew. On the day of the trial, the sky over Phoenix was covered with gray clouds. I wore a simple black dress, my silver hair pulled back in a low bun, with no jewelry other than the wedding ring my husband had given me more than 40 years ago. Julian sat next to me in the front row, reserved for the victim's family. His black suit, well ironed, highlighted his tired face. He took my hand and squeezed it softly as if to give me strength. "We'll get through this, Mrs. Harrison," he murmured. I nodded, but deep down I only wished that day would end so Andrew, if only in my thoughts, could finally rest in peace. Across the courtroom, Sarah and Thomas sat far apart, each with their own lawyer. Sarah looked haggard, her eyes sunken, with no trace of the haughtiness of the young woman who once entered my house, with a radiant smile. She wore a gray suit, her hair pulled back in a low ponytail, her hands clasped on the table, her gaze lost, avoiding meeting anyone's eyes. Thomas had his head bowed, his shoulders slumped as if he wanted to disappear from the room. Looking at them, I felt no satisfaction, only a dull pain and an anger that continued to burn silently inside me. The trial began. The prosecutor, a middle-aged woman with a firm voice and a penetrating gaze, stood up to present the case. She called me as the first witness. I walked slowly with heavy steps, but my mind clearer than ever. Under the gaze of the entire room, I recounted everything that had happened, from the last meeting with Andrew, Drew at the Sunny Corner Cafe when he spoke to me about the will with a certain uneasiness, to the fateful call from Officer Davis and the image of Sarah smiling on Miami Beach on the same day as my son's funeral. I spoke of Andrew's suspicions, how he worried about me, and the moment I discovered Sarah had tampered with the fuse box at my house, my voice didn't tremble, even though I felt my heart heavy every time I mentioned Andrew. I looked directly at Sarah as I spoke, but she didn't dare lift her head. Her shoulders trembled slightly, as if she knew her mask was starting to fall. Sarah's defense attorney, a tall man with a soft, rehearsed voice, tried to refute. "Your Honor," he said with false confidence, "Mrs. Harrison is just a grieving mother, blinded by pain. There is no direct evidence linking my client to Andrew Harrison's accident." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my skin, but I didn't reply. I knew the prosecutor was prepared. She smiled coldly and said, "We have evidence and—" The room fell silent when she instructed her assistant to project some photographs. Sarah and Thomas hand in hand at a Miami hotel, laughing by the pool like a carefree couple. Murmurs were heard among those present. Sarah's lawyer tried to stay calm, but I saw sweat beading on his forehead. Then, the prosecutor presented the bank statements showing large withdrawals from Andrew and Sarah's joint account, coinciding with the dates she traveled with Thomas. "This is a clear financial motive," she said sharply. "Sarah Miller planned to seize her husband's assets, including a life insurance policy valued at millions of dollars." The room filled with murmurs again, and this time I saw Sarah lower her head even more, as if she wanted to hide from all eyes. And then came the final proof, the definitive blow. "We request the recording be played," the prosecutor announced. A court official connected a USB flash drive to the computer, and the speakers began to emit a clear, undeniable voice. It was Thomas with a worried tone. "Are you sure everything is fine? No one suspects anything?" Then Sarah's voice was heard, cold and confident. "What are you worried about? It was just a tragic accident, a small cut in the brake line, and that's it. Andrew is gone, and we'll have everything." Her laughter was clearly audible, followed by the phrase, "I will never forget. When I collect the insurance, I'll take care of the old lady. A short circuit, a fall in the shower. I'll make her go with her darling son very soon." Silence filled the courtroom, so heavy I could hear my own breathing. Even Sarah's lawyer looked pale. His hands trembled as he flipped through the documents, unable to find a word to defend her. Sarah kept her head bowed, her shoulders shaking, as if she finally understood there was no escape. Thomas closed his eyes, his face white as chalk, resigned to his fate. The prosecutor finished her plea, her voice resonating like a sentence. "This was not an accident. It was a premeditated murder attempt, coldly calculated, driven by greed and cruelty. Sarah Miller and Thomas Reed not only took Andrew Harrison's life, but also planned to murder his mother, Mrs. Clara Harrison, to seize her assets. They must pay for their crimes." When the jury left the room to deliberate, I remained seated with my hands clasped, my gaze fixed forwards, but not really seeing anything. Julian placed his hand on my shoulder without saying a word, but his presence was enough to keep me from feeling alone. I thought of Andrew, the years we shared, his child's smile, how he hugged me tightly before leaving. I wondered if he knew that I had fought for him, that I hadn't allowed his sacrifice to be in vain. The jury returned 2 hours later, and there was no longer any doubt in their eyes. The judge, an older man with a deep voice, stood up and read the sentence. Sarah Miller is guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Sentenced to 35 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Sarah broke into sobs, her head down as the police placed handcuffs on her and led her out of the room. Thomas Reed, the judge continued, guilty of complicity in murder, sentenced to 25 years in prison. Thomas said nothing. He only bowed his head and allowed the officers to lead him away. The judge's gavel sounded on the bench, marking the end of the trial. The entire room seemed to exhale in relief, but I felt no satisfaction at all. Only a strange feeling of emptiness enveloped me. Justice had been done, but Andrew would never return. I closed my eyes and saw his face, his smile, bright as a summer sunbeam. I whispered low enough for only him and me to hear, "Son, you can finally rest in peace." In the days following the trial, my small house seemed less cold. The sunlight began to filter through the window, leaving warm patches on the old tiled floor. The backyard where I used to water the plants through tears now overflowed with life with new green shoots. Julian didn't return to London as soon as I thought. He said he needed to sort some things out, but I knew he just wanted to stay to make sure I was okay. He came almost every day, bringing small gifts, sometimes a loaf of freshly baked sourdough from the nearby bakery, other times a bunch of fresh vegetables from the farmer's market. Some days he quietly helped me repair the wooden fence or prune the garden branches. Those simple gestures, full of meaning, were his way of reminding me that I was no longer alone. We didn't talk much about the past, the painful days, or Sarah and Thomas. Instead, we talked about everyday things, as I used to do with Andrew. I told Julian about the old days when Andrew was little and ran around the garden with a red tomato in his hand, shouting, "Mom, this one is the biggest." Julian smiled, his eyes lighting up as he talked about his wife and his 2 children in London, his work as a retired police officer who now dedicated himself to gardening and teaching the neighborhood kids to play soccer via video call. These stories, although simple, made me feel alive again, even if only a little. One Sunday afternoon, Julian arrived with a pot of red azaleas and placed it on the windowsill where it received the most sun. "It goes well with your house," he said softly. "It's strong, just like you." I smiled, stroking the soft petals, feeling the warmth in his words. We sat at the kitchen table drinking chamomile tea, and for the first time in many months, I felt a little peace. "Mrs. Harrison," Julian began, his voice hesitant as if weighing every word, "I've spoken with my wife. We want to invite you to live with our family in London, so you can have a change of scenery, a new beginning." He looked at me with a sincere but worried expression, as if fearing I would reject him. I smiled and gently shook my head. "Thank you, Julian. That's very kind of you, but this is my home. Andrew's memories are here, in this garden, in this kitchen, on the armchair where he used to read. I can't move away from all that." I paused, looking out the window where the azaleas were receiving the sunlight. I belong to this place, no matter how painful it is. Julian nodded as if he had anticipated my answer. He didn't insist, and he just remained silent for a moment, turning his cup in his hands. Then he looked up and gazed at me for a long time, with a gentle but determined look. "Andrew saved my life once," he said in a low voice, almost as if confessing a secret. "When we were kids, I slipped and fell into the creek. The current was strong and I didn't know how to swim. Andrew jumped in and pulled me out, even though he was scared too. I owe him my life." He took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "He asked me to take care of you. I failed him when I couldn't save him. But now I want to fulfill that promise. Mrs. Harrison, if you allow me, I want you to accept me as your adoptive son." He stopped, and in his gaze, there was a mixture of hope and fear, as if he were afraid I would say no. I froze, my heart stopping for an instant. Tears welled up, but this time, not from pain, but from the warmth and gratitude of knowing that love still remained in my life. I looked at Julian, the man who had left his quiet life in London to come back here to fulfill a promise to his deceased friend. In him, I saw not only Andrew's friend, but also a son, someone willing to protect me as Andrew once did. I smiled slightly, a real smile after so many days of darkness. "My son chose his friend well," I said, my voice choked. Julian smiled, his eyes also red-rimmed. He took my hand, squeezed it softly, and at that instant I felt Andrew somewhere smiling at both of us. Since then, every weekend, Julian and I go to the cemetery together. We no longer take white lilies, those flowers that reminded me of the funeral and the pain. Instead, we take bouquets of white chrysanthemums, Andrew's favorite flowers when he was alive. Chrysanthemums are flowers of faith, Mom, he used to say when he was a child who loved looking at the garden. We stand in front of the grave, telling Andrew the week's stories about the azaleas blooming, the new garden fence, or the soccer games Julian watches with the kids in London via video call. Sometimes I just stand there in silence, feeling Andrew's presence in every gentle breeze. I no longer feel alone. The pain of having lost Andrew is still there, like a scar that will never heal. But now it is softened by the affection and the new connection. Julian has become part of my life, not to replace Andrew, but to continue the love and protection my son left behind. I understood that love never dies. It only changes form in one way or another and continues to illuminate our lives in unexpected ways. After all the loss and suffering, I understood something. One cannot control what happens, but one can choose how to face it. There are wounds that never heal, but from them is born the strength of resilience. The truth sometimes arrives late, but justice, if we have the courage to seek it, always finds its way to shine. Life can be cruel, but if we keep love, kindness, and the will not to give up in our hearts, even in the deepest darkness, there will always be a light to guide us. The story you have just heard has been modified in names and places to protect the identity of those involved. We tell it not to judge, but with the hope that someone listens and pauses to reflect. How many mothers suffer in silence within their own home? I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to remain silent to keep the peace? Or would you have the courage to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion because every story can become a candle that illuminates the path of others. God always blesses, and I'm sure that courage will lead us to better days. Now, on the final screen, I will leave 2 of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.